everyone, this is Claudia, reference librarian here at McAllen Public Library, and welcome to Introducing Latinx Voices and Stories, featuring Rodney Gomez, the 2020-2021 McAllen Poet Laureate, and Edward Vidaurre, 2018-2019 McAllen Poet Laureate. I'd like to welcome you both, Rodney and Edward, and thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Hello.
Okay, if I may, I'd like to share the list of published works that you have done. Edward Vidaurre is the author of I Took My Barrio on a Road Trip, Insomnia, Chicano Blood Transfusion, Pandemia and Other Poems, Jazz House, Ramona and Rumi, and Beautiful Scars. Rodney Gomez is the author of Arsenal with Praise Song, Ceremony of Sand, Geographic Tongue, and Citizens of the Mausoleum. So I'd like to ask both of you, how did you get started writing poetry and the Latinx stories? If you want to start, Rodney?
Sure. So I guess I've been writing poetry since I was in grade school, in elementary. You know, it was just a way for me to express myself, to use my imagination. I've always had a love of language, of words, of interesting ways to use words. I always tried to be the kid in class who tried to invent stuff, and tell stories and things like that. So it's really been a part of my life since the very beginning. And I never really made a conscious effort to tell a particular kind of story. It just, the culture sort of seeps out in what I write. It's because, I grew up here. I grew up in Brownsville. I come from a very poor background. My family's from Mexico, so that sort of just comes out in the writing. It's like a natural part of me. And so, it's been there since the very beginning. But it's been a driving force, ever since I was a little kid. I remember writing those poems on, little pieces of paper and sharing them with friends and things like that. So it's always been a part of me.
Edward, I'd ask you the same question. How did you get started to write poetry in the Latinx stories?
Well, I started writing poetry a little later in life, actually. I always liked writing, period. I used to love to just read lyrics and stuff. So I always had a connection with poetry. So my thing was always loving music by songwriters, and I used to love to read the lyrics. And so I think poetry was always there. I just didn't put it out on paper for myself until I came to Texas, really, a little over 20 years ago. So there's a writers group in San Benito that gets together at the Narciso Cultural Arts Center, and they would always put an announcement that on Tuesdays they were getting together for readings. And I think for the first 2 years after seeing that announcement, I said, I'm gonna go one day, and I started writing, just stuff that I remembered from the past. And at the time I was reading poetry, so I was teaching myself on how maybe poetry should look on paper. So not until I felt like I wrote a poem on paper did I go to this reading and started to recite poetry. But that's what got it going. I think the poetry was always there with loving lyrics and loving songwriters, and then just putting my own story on paper and jumping at it.
Yes, and I've read both of your works, and it's so emotional, and it really resonates with me coming from the borderlands, and I feel like I connect to both of your writings because I see it every day living here in the borderlands. So I see those stories. And how did you start the writing process? Is it more organic or free flowing, or is it in stages?
for me, I guess for me, the sometimes it's different. You know, sometimes reading something inspires me to write, and then sometimes, going back to maybe a line that I wrote on a note. You know, some triggers something that feels like it'll fit that line and make it into a poem, and sometimes just sitting down and it just flows out. But it's different every time. It's never the same for me. If I sit down and say I'm going to write, um, sometimes I just write, a few lines, just really randomly, and it never becomes just like a poem. But then there's times where I'm doing something
Mhm.
and something triggers. I could be reading something and it triggers a complete poem. And I stop whatever I'm doing. If it's a book, I just put the book down and I open up the computer, or jot it down with if I have something to write with, I start writing, until I feel like, I exhausted every idea or thought of a poem, and then I stop and then return to it. But it's a little different each time.
What about you, Rodney?
Yeah, I was thinking when Edward said trigger, I was thinking of a book by Richard Hugo called The Triggering Town. And he's a poet, and he's basically talking about, I guess, putting ourselves in a state of mind where even little things can sort of trigger a poem or get you in the mind to be receptive to create a poem. And so, I've been writing for a long time, but it was never really structured. It was, sporadic. And then, if something sort of, triggered me and sort of inspired me, then I would write it down. But it was not really organized. And then sometime, I don't know, I don't know when that was exactly, but I decided, you know what, I need to get more organized. And so I made it a point to write a little bit every day. And then I started keeping organized journals, like I would have a poem book. And so I would write all my poems in that little journal. And so now it's sort of like very, I don't want to say business-like, but it's organized. And it's like a daily routine. Like I write a little every day, and I have journals that I fill out, and that's where I write. Sometimes I write on the iPhone too. I'll use the notes and write there. But I sort of have it as a habit now. It's just automatic. And yeah, anything will sort of cause me to write. I could watch a movie, or I hear somebody say a sentence or something, and I start thinking about it. Or it just sounds interesting, and I'm like, oh, that'll make a cool poem. Let me work with it. So. Yeah, similar to like Edward, it could be a whole host of things or different sources for it.
So I would like to hear from both of you about your amazing poetry. Can we begin maybe like a reading from each one of you? One of the poetry of your choice?
Sure, I can begin.
Okay.
Let's see. Let me pull it up. I'm going to read a poem called Ship of Theseus.
Okay.
Let me pull it up. Okay, Ship of Theseus. The other day I realized I wasn't me. The me I was when I was a cloud's infinite possible shapes. A ship of Theseus. The original ship, stored in a museum, slowly rots away and its parts are gradually replaced. Eventually, none of the original parts remains. Is it still the same ship? I think of how weak my hands were in the music library, listening to Berlioz. How rough they are, washing my daughter's bottles. My eyes are a different mood. I have been repurposed to live for someone else. In a nearby warehouse, the original ship parts are stored and repieced into a corpse. Which is the ship? Neither, knowing real things like music take no body. One or the other if conflict is song. Both with the same aim of survival. Both with loss as the same mother.
So that poem has several themes. Is it reflective of self? Is it reflective of like what was your thought process when you started writing the poem?
So, right after my daughter was born, she's a year and a half now. I started thinking a lot about, how I would change and how I had changed up to that point. And so I've written a lot about fatherhood and things like that. And so you see the mention in the poem about washing bottles. That's biographical. But I'm also very into philosophical problems and thinking about self and identity and things like that. And so I was just the poem came out of just thinking about myself as a father and then how I've changed over time. Am I the same person I was before? And what things maybe have caused me to change. And so the speaker in the poem is not necessarily me, but certainly the poem is inspired by my biographical events and sort of this thinking about personhood over time and whether we remain the same and what it is about us that sort of keeps us thinking of ourselves as the same person over time, even after all we go through and the changes in our lives. So,
absolutely. Edward, would you like to share one of your readings?
Sure thing. And going back to inspiration, this poem is titled "If Roque Dalton Were My Father," and I was reading him at the time when I wrote this, and there was a line in one of his poems that said, "How can anyone think of making love in this fire?" In Spanish. And so then I wrote this: "If Roque Dalton were my father, we would have discussions about the lake in the sky, the longing for pupusas del Oroco as we sit and fight off the Texas heat drinking ensalada. I would be smoking and he would be writing to El Salvador with his gray hands, perhaps a song, a poem, a new anthem. If Roque Dalton were my father, he too would have left me, and all I would have left to remember him by would be gunpowder, books, and that lake in the sky. I would be his love, not the kind of love he's proud of, but the kind of love he suffers for. We would sit in silence, we would crave it together, the halt of things, the respect for nature's song, the listening for once, not voices, sounds, together, listening for the sound of pain, together, searching for the place where it is adhered to. No yelling, no screaming, no man made sounds, just our souls when walking, the crisp whispers of our clothes when we slip into them, the sighs of the dying, and what of the marimba playing as we swallow black oysters? Why do you pant? Your face tumbling downward, sinking into the ashes, my heart. I would ask about the birds and the bees. How can anyone think of making love in this fire? Sun, everything burns, the streets, the walls, our nakedness, even the entrance to heaven. Sometimes we must not even look to the skies. Clouds want to go unseen when the bell tolls at noon. And we will sit in silence on the hillside, watching the smoke, listening to the sirens and gunfire, eating manguitos, trembling. We have both lost good friends, written their names in the sky, poured cold beer on hot asphalt in their memory. I sometimes whistle when I think of the dead.
That is a very moving poetry. It really is. It has a lot of emotion, and I realize, when I read some of your works, and both of you, I have a perspective from my own lens, and hearing you read it, it gives me a whole different perspective because I'm hearing it from your own voice and the way that you, read the poetry. Makes me think of it in a different way, and it's very beautiful. Would you like to share a second reading, Rodney?
sure. This was called A Short Tablature of Loss. A funeral home before the funeral, the ghosts it despises, evaporated holy water, messiah of satin roses, The prayer before it becomes a prayer, in the throat, the machine for lamenting. Musk of kindling after fire, char as in these hands are reaching, but all they can grasp is air. The road the hearse used to carry the body to the wormhole, a sling carrying a body with broken clocks, taproot. My mother in her mainframe, captive to pumps, pipes, irrigation tubes, the spotlessness of her gown, immaculate hem of nurses' smocks, wasping of night hours, invading mornings, spreading tick-tock like spilled salt. The way they pull the needles off as if freeing a smoker's lung from its escutcheon. My grandmother in her wheelchair at Good Samaritan Nursing Home, rubbing a rosary into dust and flecks of gold leaf on her lap, and the way she would stare at a space in the wall as if God was speaking in that very language. Hurricane calm before the posts prayed. Coven of whistling thorns. After the relocation of water, blessing and blessed. Coming home to that shack on Calle Tulipan, how the lawn had yellowed as phlegm, how the blocks under the house had worried themselves loose. My father, who'd lost his leg in Korea, sprinting along the fields to save our grapefruit from frost, and in his speed, 2 spinnerets playing patty cake. The mark of the poor, tentativeness. A body crumpled into cassocks. The sunflower field where it was abandoned, and the moon in its resignation. The dream of all hunters, to justify an absence that requires sacrifice of innocent things. Pulling petals from a dayflower to form a fence. Smoothing a rock to make a false eye. As if creating the missing of things could cure the loss of some others. Thank you.
Thank you. That was amazing. I really feel the emotion in that substantially. It talks about loss and grief and just overall there's a little bit of sadness in the words and a lot of raw emotions and what was behind the written work of the poetry itself.
Yeah, so that poem is from my book, Citizens of the Mausoleum, which is basically an elegy. I wrote it after the passing of my mom many years ago. And so a lot of the poems deal with loss and sort of coping and things like that. And so obviously you can hear that coming through in the poem. And, it was an attempt for me to deal with her death and her passing. But it's also a way to sort of look back at history and remember a lot of things. And so the book has a lot of interconnected poems that are, some of them are biographical, some are not. But it's an attempt at sort of piecing together history also and remembrance and things like that. So,
and what a great way to remember her through a masterpiece and a work of poetry. It really honors her memory, and helps with the overall expressing how you felt in the moment, and it's really moving and really lovely.
thank you.
Edward, would you like to share a second poetry reading?
Sure. This poem is titled God Is. 1. God is an open wound, a kung fu movie and a celestial sicario. God made our president with leftover road cotton and grackle droppings. His sandals are of leftover human skin from the factory of suicide rock stars. Today he wears the kneecaps of Janice to match his UFO belt. God is unfazed at 3 p.m. He whispers to me from a 6 feet distance. God lays naked on steel surfaces with his long hair covering the shadow of men. God has a sticker on his chest that reads, I voted. He's nonchalant. He has a twin. She does all the good work. 2. God is your God's God, yoga and breathing. She is the breath of life, latex gloves and exhaling the sun over mountains. She is the blamed, the curve, the torn Achilles heel. God is a beat poet, the coming strain, the big question, the control, the last minute mind changer, the finger on the gun, the safety switch. God is the ultimate filter, the event planner, the street cleaner, the thing in the sky that was there and then was not, the ventilator, the death toll. She knows the bodies are coming. 3. God is language, a lisp and stutter. God has Down syndrome, the autistic genius, the only child. From the other side of the tracks, have you ever thought of God as old, the wrinkled hobo and toothless smoker, the girl next door, the square jawed bad hombre, creator of a new earth between ellipses, growing peonies on hyphens? God is soil and water, the trans angel, the monk making booze, the anorexic gargoyle breaking off a ledge, the movement in the painting. God's number is 8 digits behind iron bars, the noisemaker, the Vuvuzuela in purgatory, guilty. God is doing time. 4. God is a found poem in exile, an unbelievable truth, an asteroid belt crash, mammoth, that sound, that silence. 5. God is tired of rising on Easter. God is trying to figure out the diameter of this pandemic, writing ghostly hymns for the dead. Did you know God was the celestial laureate? Skywritings, the sounds you hear in the morning of birds and wind chimes, speeding cars and barking dogs. Did you think the sound was just that? Commotion? God writes those sounds into existence every day. I know when God is in a Motown mood, a hippie rock, or just a lounging jazz mood. And when it's too quiet, God let the whiskey get the better of him. 6. God likes to drink with me. I listen.
Beautiful. What inspired you to write that work?
I mean, it's just, everything that's going on, the pandemic and the questions of why is it happening? Why are people dying? And, who is God? And, is God a man? Is God a woman? Is God, here? Is God there? Can God be this? Can God be that? So it's basically saying, God can be everything. God can be all the negative things that we think of, and we have to accept it. You know, we God can be, the beautiful things in life too, like the child with Down syndrome, that we take for granted in acknowledging as beautiful sometimes, where people might see, a disability as a bad thing. I figured that we could see God in everybody, and nature, in people, in sounds, in thoughts.
Mhm. That's very true. In my opinion, poetry is intimate and deeply personal, and it evokes the strong emotions as we've seen today from the readings due to the power of words. Does the vulnerability of your work feel like an extension of self? And then how do you separate the self from the poetry?
you know when I put it on paper and stuff, it's a way of exhaling. It's a way of self, I guess, self cleansing at times, self care at times. Sometimes it's just fooling around and writing fun things, but you're basically writing things down to let go. So
Mhm.
you pretty much you're using your vulnerability, of course, but you're also letting go. And once you let go, and it's in the eyes of the reader, then it becomes something totally different. It becomes theirs. It's something that, for me, poetry is a living thing. It's a living organism, and it enters the mind of the reader differently from the way it's put on paper by the poet. So I can't translate my poetry for you because it meant something for me at the time, and it will mean something for me differently a week or a month or a year after I read it, even if I wrote it. Sort of like verses in the Bible for some people. Everybody goes to that one psalm every time they feel a certain way for a meaning or for us or for direction, and it's not, you can't look at it literally. You've got to look at it as something that's a little more like alive, something that's working through you.
Rodney, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, the way we communicate with each other and form relationships is language, and image, and for me, poetry is the way that I speak. It's my own form of communication, and so what I have to say is sort of channeled through that form. And so I don't write fiction. I don't write song lyrics or anything like that. I write poems, and it's not necessarily a conscious choice. It's just what feels right to me, and I think everybody sort of has something in their lives that they use to communicate most effectively with. And for me, it's poetry. And it is a reflection of myself simply because it's the tool I use to say things. I think most honestly and most effectively. So yeah.
In the last year since the pandemic started, has your writing process or style changed? I know there's been a lot of changes for all of us, and how is that for you as a writer?
Oh yeah, I think I've been at home. I haven't really been going into work for the past year, and so I know some people have had to go and work and be out and about. So for us, especially since we have a newborn in the house, we've been really careful and stuff. So before, I would have a lot more, I think, connection to the way people speak, and those conversations that are face to face are different than those that you have over Zoom or online. It's just a different context and a different atmosphere when you discuss things like that. So for me, the poetry has sort of gotten a little more. How should I say this? Like not more introspective, but more concerned with sort of navigating my way out of being sort of feeling trapped in a lot of ways. And so I think the way that I've been expressing myself in recent things is significantly different than before, and I've tried to sort of get out of a long funk that I had where I didn't write anything for most of the pandemic. I just didn't write anything at all, and it's only been in the past few months where I've started sort of gaining traction again and sort of finally feeling comfortable with putting words on paper. So yeah.
What about you, Edward?
Well, I wrote a book, and I there were pockets where it kind of slowed down. Different things were happening in the country, and at even here with work, everything changed. The everything that was normal was not normal anymore, and so even for my daughter, the school, not going to school and staying home, so having to figure out a way to be creative, kind of in a way where it was okay, this is the only way you're going to be creative, at home, and so the thing that I found was that you go through so many things when you're kind of like, I guess, sequestered, right, or quarantined, that you run out of things to do at times. Like, okay, you could only watch so many shows, or you could only, after a while, you can only read so much, and then it's like, okay, we're all still here, we can't go anywhere, but what do we do? And so but my wife's done a great job by going outside and beautifying the garden and being out there. And so just paying attention, I think, was the biggest thing for me during the pandemic, was just becoming more aware of things, becoming more aware of myself, and even embracing boredom,
Mhm.
embracing silence at times, and being more in tune with health and even our even in nature, especially because we're spending more time out there. And so there was a lot of beauty to it, that I hope a lot of people took advantage of during the time, because once everything opens back up fully, I think a lot of people are going to wish they still had that extra time to spend on their home and again their garden and even with themselves. But it gave me an opportunity to focus and kind of get rid of the clouds that were in my mind, and get a lot more you know creative energy going, and just finding a way to again embrace boredom and enjoy the silence before it goes back to like you know full blown chaos. And when I say that, it's just the everyday grind of life, the traffic and the being in public with tons of people around and stuff like that. So that's what's changed. I did a lot of writing, and then I did a lot of non-writing and more just absorbing the things that I needed to just embrace the new lifestyle.
Absolutely. Now, inspiration comes from many sources. Aside from your own work, what writers do you feel represent your story?
Oh, are you gonna? Oh, Edward, do you want to start? Yeah.
People that represent my own story, I think that anyone that I'm reading,
Mhm.
there's a way that I can intertwine with their work and see myself in it, and hopefully they feel the same when they read my work. But I'm also a publisher, so I'm reading manuscripts and publishing work, and so I find myself in a lot of the work that I read in a way to where I'm inspiring that work, but I'm living similar things in those works. And because we're all living at the same time in the same moments, I feel like I can say that, right? Because we're sharing the same tragedies, we're sharing the same crises in the nation. So we're seeing the same things, and so a lot of the writing comes through and is very besides inspiring, but it just touches a spot in your heart sometimes and in your mind, because you can relate to the sound, and you can relate to the the words that they're putting out there. So for me, it's more of the contemporary poet that I read now that I feel I'm in tune with, than say something that I'm reading that was written 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah. This sort of ties into a question that Kate asked on Facebook. She asked, "What are you reading now?" And so I'm thinking about the conscious choices I make about what to read. And so I used to read a lot of poetry. And so when I was reading a lot of poetry, some of the current poets that I really loved would be like Eduardo Corral or Rigoberto Gonzalez, Cheryl Luna, people like that. And I think they were telling a similar story to the one that a lot of us tell about the Rio Grande Valley and the borderlands and things like that. But I made a conscious effort to not read poetry anymore. So for the past couple of years, I've read a lot of fiction and a lot of nonfiction. And last year, I decided I wasn't going to read any fiction book by a white male author, that I was just going to read stories by women, and especially women of color and from different countries. And so like currently I'm reading a lot of Asian writers. Like I just finished reading Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto, and I finished The Vegetarian too recently. And so I'm focusing like on Asian writers, just because of a lot of the contemporary violence that's occurring against Asian women. And so I thought, what's a way for me to sort of maybe change my worldview a little bit, or what am I missing, or how can I educate myself? And so when I think about what authors are reflecting my voyage, I think it's pretty broad, and I look for people that are telling a compelling story about their own lives and their own experiences. But I think for far too long, I've sort of been influenced by a certain culture that wasn't really mine, and so now I'm trying to expand, my view, my point of view, and bringing in other voices that maybe I've neglected into the conversation.
So, how do you think the Latinx story is represented in mainstream publishing, and what can we do as allies to signal boost Latinx writers in our community and beyond?
Well, you can buy some books from Flower Song Press. That would be a that would be a start. No, I think I'm really excited about the recent explosion that I've seen in a lot of major publishing houses and the publishers picking up Latinx voices. And so I think that's just a reflection of the fact that there's a lot of quality and talent and art and mastery there, and there's stories there that need to be told. And I think the larger our population grows, I think that's just going to become a larger representation too. And there's voices that have been neglected for so long and for so many years. So I'm really excited about that. But to be serious, Flower Song really is doing fantastic work, and it's a local press. And Edward is really, spearheading that, and has done an amazing job. So I wanted to give him kudos. I've told him this already, so he knows it. But it's amazing the amount of good work that is being put out by the press. But there are others. I mean, it's not to the point where we need to be, because far too many, I think, publishing choices are still being made that are not inclusive. But I think it's gotten significantly better than even just a few years ago.
Edward, would you like to talk about the representation of Latinx stories in mainstream publishing?
Right. I think and thanks, Rodney. I am trying to get the voices out, but I can't do it all by myself. I would love to see more publishers, pop up in different pockets around the country and around the world, actually. And we need more women publishers out there as well. We need more focus on, LGBTQ plus communities, trans communities, and I'd love to see just publishers that are like I said, women publishers, and there's so much that needs to be published all over, and we can only do so much. So I think whenever you see small publishers out there that are trying to get up on their feet, and you see what their focus is and what their goal is in creating that press, for those that can donate to them also, it keeps them afloat so that they can continue to put out work. So I think that helps for people that are allies, like you said. And how can they help? They can help with, figuring out a way to help keep those presses alive so that those voices can be heard. Even if it's buying a book and donating it to their local library, that still does a lot. Or if they know school teachers, say, hey, try this book, maybe you guys can teach it. But even people of our own culture and race, if you see us putting it out there, put us in your schools, invite us to your universities, not just that circle of academics, but look for the small presses, look for those that are, hustling down there and really, need a way to get into, the big, campuses and stuff like that. Do it if you can, because we're also keeping an eye, we're also watching what everyone's doing up there, and we notice sometimes that, hey, I it's like, get away from the elitist, badge and stuff, move out of the norm and get out of your comfort zone and invite that, you know 19-year-old, author that just comes up through Flower Song, or even someone who's seasoned, that can help and lead the way. But most presses have, donation tabs on their websites, and so there's a way to help. And you'll see, though, I mean, you'll see the work coming out, constantly, if there's the support. And if you're grant writers, that's another way, find out if there's a way you can help with, getting a grant going, or helping the small presses fill out grants. Sometimes, that will make a huge difference as well.
So, what are the current projects that you're working on at the moment?
Right now, actually, we're getting ready to do the 14th annual Rio Grande Valley International Poetry Festival that usually takes place throughout the valley, and sometimes we do it with Mexico. But because of the pandemic, it's going to be virtual. But we're able to. We're going to do a lot this year. We're going to have workshops. We're going to have our featured writer Luis Alberto Urrea on Thursday, with a talk, sort of like this. We're gonna have a talk and discussion, questions, and hopefully he'll read some stuff, and we'll talk about, anything new he's working on. And we'll be unveiling the cover art for the anthology of Boundless 2021. And we've got poets that, I mean, it's over 300 pages, the book, and we've got poets from all over the world, and that's exciting. We also have a youth section of poets, youth poets from the valley, and we're going to have workshops. We're inviting small presses from different parts of the nation. Get Fresh Publishing from New Jersey, Aslan Libre Press from San Antonio, and other presses that are going to be involved. A La Brava Press from San Antonio as well. And so you can look at the website valleypoetryfest.org, and you'll be able to see the schedule of events.
Okay.
But and also we are Flower Song Press. We are kicking open the door to children's books with Juventud Press, our sister imprint, and we will be publishing our first children's book. It's a book co-authored by Regina Moya and Dr. Carmen Tafoya, with illustrations by Regina Moya, and it's a beautiful book, and that'll be out in probably in the summer. And so we're working on that, and we started doing novels, and so our first two novels were award winners. One won the Texas Institute of Letters prize for first fiction, and the second, Dreaming with Mariposas. The first one was Loose at Midnight, and the second one, Dreaming with Mariposas by Sonia Gutierrez, won the Tomas Rivera Children's Award for older readers. So but there's a lot going on. You can go to Flower Song Press, and you can go to the Poetry Festival page, and you can go to my website too, if you want to look at what I have there on my page.
Fantastic. Rodney, anything you're currently working on at the moment?
Yeah, so as part of my tenure as McAllen Poet Laureate, the beginning of this year, we put out a youth anthology, a youth poetry anthology called Still I Rise. It was put out through Juventud Press. So that's available. And then also, as part of the laureateship, I was organizing some workshops, some poetry workshops that have been occurring with local poets. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, it couldn't be in person, but we've been doing it through Zoom. So those will continue until the end of my tenure, which is at the end of this year. And so we have several that I'm happy that Edward is helping with through the poetry festival. So I'm doing one on visual poetry, and then Selena Gomez is doing one on speaking out and using poetry to sort of address trauma.
Mhm.
And then, we hope to have those workshops continue throughout the rest of the year as well. I'm also working on a resource for just anybody who wants to go in virtually through a website, through the Poet Laureate website, which will have basically local poets and their works and things like that. So, if anybody wants to just go in and look at the scene and look at what's going on locally with poetry, they can use the website as a resource. And then just personally on my own work, I'm working on a new collection. So I just published one in January, and usually the way this works is you get a collection or a manuscript picked up by a publisher, and then it takes like 2 years for it to come out. So I just had Arsenal with Praise Song come out in January, but I'm working on a new collection, and it's really about the city and urban life and precarity and those kinds of things. So in my full-time job, I do planning. I do urban planning, among other things, and so I'm sort of bringing that to bear in the collection and thinking about the idea of a city and how we live in cities and how the cities affect us and things like that. So it's in its very early stages in its infancy, but I think that's what it's going to end up being about, in the future.
Well, there were some amazing events, and thank you for sharing that with our audience. We all look forward to seeing all those events. We do have a question from Kate Horan that says, have you ever had a poem come to you in a dream?
Probably ideas for poems. Yeah, I have written small little prose pieces from something I just wrote real fast after waking up from a dream. But yeah, I think so. I've had a few actually. Nightmares.
Yeah, I don't remember my dreams. It's very rare that I remember a dream. So yeah, unfortunately, I know that that's often a source of poets' material, but yeah, it's never happened with me. Yeah.
Take some melatonin.
Melatonin.
Well, I'm so thankful that both of you are here today for this program introducing Latinx voices and stories. We do appreciate that you were here today. And thank you so much for sharing your readings and discussions and all the events that are up and coming. So we thank you so much for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, I'd like to thank our audience for watching. And if you enjoyed this program, I invite you to follow our programming at facebook.com/NPL Adults or subscribe to our YouTube channel at McAllen Public Library. Thank you, everyone, for being here today, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.